One of the things I took from the CEO was bad headspace. So when that review was written, that individual wasn't in a good place. So I took that into consideration. I mean, I was pissed, and our CEO he calmed me down. I mean, this was your lay on the couch and let me talk to you for a second kind of moment. I was a psychology major for a year. He was turning that right back around on me. So I cooled down and understood and empathized with where that director was. He knew that I was copied into it. I calmly went in and said, hey, I saw this. And he said, yeah, you weren't supposed to. And I said, well, I did. I don't agree with it. And he said, he kind of copped it. And he said, okay, I get it. And it's something maybe we can work on.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
It's a noisy world out there. So anytime you have that most valuable of things, a small window into your ideal customer's attention span, are you clear and memorable with your value proposition? Of course, that is all the more complicated by the fact that the small window of attention isn't only when they see your big TV campaign or whatnot. It can come from so many places. It's also when they step into your store, add something to the cart on your website, reach out to customer service, and on, which is why this lesson from a podcast guest application stood out to me. Even bad brands can be good when they're consistent. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Drew Holmgreen, the CEO of PPAI. Thanks for joining me, Drew.
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, just looking at a quick cherry picking of Drew's background from LinkedIn here. He's been an account executive at McCann, Chief Experience Officer at Meeting Professionals International. For the past 5 months, he's been at PPAI. PPAI is the Promotional Products Association International, the largest trade association for the $27 billion promotional products industry in the world. It's a community of 15,000 members. At PPAI, Drew manages a team of 50 and a budget of $25 million. So Drew, give us a sense. What is your day like as CEO?
Yeah. So, I mean, being 5 months in, a lot of it is a ton of learning. I'm at that proverbial fire hose right now, just really trying to get as much information as I can about the industry. And a lot of that involves my meeting with a bunch of our key stakeholders. I've been out on the road quite a bit, touching base with some of our key members. I spent a lot of time in conversations, getting constructive feedback from a lot of our key members. But then, being somewhat new in this position, I probably spend the majority of my time really thinking about how to strategically push this industry forward in a way that pairs with our vision, mission, and core values. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that, validating decisions, seeking out what information I don't have. And that information can come from the amazing staff that are here, the board that's here to support me, and again, those members. So I do a lot of reading research reports, a lot of catching up on industry articles that exist out there, many of which we compose. So yeah, it's that fire hose and really helping me understand this industry and where it needs to go.
I mean, that is a great way to start a role. A lot of listening, thinking, researching. I know I've made the mistake before of just kind of rolling in and shoot from the hip, wanting to change everything right away. So kudos to you. Well, let's take a look at some of the key lessons from your career. I know I've probably said this before, but I've never worked in any other industry. I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary, but I feel like we get to make things. That's something really cool about marketing. We make things and not everyone gets to make things. So let's see some lessons from some of the things you made. You said rally together to overcome Murphy's Law. So how did you learn this lesson?
Yeah, I think as any marketer is going to find out, the worst case scenario is always something that can potentially play out, and Murphy's Law is something that you've got to be prepared for. Specifically, when you're preparing for contingencies, you need to rely on a really strong team to get there. And this particular case, I had a client back in call it 2009, I think, called Sports Chalet. Sports Chalet, if you've lived on the West Coast, you know Sports Chalet really well. So Sporting Goods store had about, I want to say 55 stores spread throughout California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. And really their core focus was around winter sports and skateboarding. Really, really, really cool experience. Very much an experiential shop. So when you went in there, they were known as the experts. So everybody who worked there was an expert in what they did. So if you were going there to look at some skateboarding stuff, dude in the back there was a skateboarder, and he knew how to talk to you about trucks and everything else. If you needed a new snowboard, dude working in the snow shop was a snowboarder. So everybody there was truly an expert. So when they came to us this was when I was at TM Advertising, they had a whole campaign that they wanted to launch around Black Friday that was going to be focused on all of these new styles that they were getting for their winter sports. So snowboards, all that gear, skis, all that gear, all that stuff. So the campaign that we pitched to them was, you're the experts. So let's bring in the experts to be pitchmen for you. And we went out and contracted with some incredible talent. Not necessarily Shaun White, because we didn't have that kind of budget, but think like, the step down from the Shaun Whites of the world. The people who were so well known on the winter sports circuit. All of these pros, just amazing athletes, amazing women athletes, male athletes, all of them extremely charismatic. And so we did this huge shoot over the course of like a week out in LA, brought all of these athletes in, decked them out in the gear, had them showing off all of the skis and the snowboards and the boots and everything else. I remember that I can't remember all their names, but there was this one athlete who was really well known for her relationship with her dog. And her dog was like in all her social media. Her dog would show up in every ad that she did. And so we had this really cool video of her interacting with the dog, and then the dog interacting with the snowboard. And so like all this stuff was really cool. We developed, which at the time, it kind of looked like, this is my geek coming out, but it kind of looked like Superman's Fortress of Solitude type mountain, okay, with all these crystal shards on the side of it. And each time that the user would mouse over one of those shards, that shard would pull out 3D, come towards you on your screen, and then fold out to a video of that athlete talking about the product. And within that, when you clicked through, you could go buy the product. Okay, so I think we had, call it a dozen, maybe 15 different athletes in there. And golly, I mean, the videos we had from them, they were engaging with the merch, but then also they were telling stories. So they were telling stories about why that particular product was great. They were telling personal stories about how they got into snow sports and winter sports. So it was an unbelievable experience. We got a ton of awards for it. I mean, worked just night and day to get this thing put together. And even if you took this experience and transplanted it from 2009 to 2025, it still would hold. Like, it was such a cool experience. So we create all of this. We invest a ton of money into it. We're leading up to Black Friday. Whole campaign is set. We've got a pretty heavy localized digital media campaign pushing people to the mountain, which is what it's called. We have real creative things that we do in our industry, but then we just called it the mountain. But anyway, so we're getting everything set up there. And about a week out, our client calls us and says, hey, so here's the deal. We had to pull the plug with our e-commerce engine. And we're sitting there on this call. We're like, okay, so who's the new one? We can repoint all the links and everything. Yeah, there is no new one. So we're like, we've got a $500,000 media campaign. We just spent $250,000 on a digital experience. And then there's our fees. So you're in this about $1 million. What do you want us to do? And they said, yeah, we need you to figure that out. So we're like, okay, cool. So we're also in a contract year at this point. So we're like, we really do need to figure this out. So it's the week before Thanksgiving. We pull the entire, our account planning team, our creative team, our media team, even brought in our digital outsourced vendor based out of New York that built the mountain. And we said, guys, we got to figure this out. What are we going to do? And we pulled together this very last minute idea of creating these codes that lived within each of the shards. So still operated the same way. So you go to the website, you click on the Fortress of Solitude Mountain crystal, it opens up, athlete comes on there, it says, purchase this item. Here's your code for 10% off in store. So we changed it from being an e-commerce experience to an in-store experience. Ended up driving a lot of good traction to the store. It ended up working. But so, Daniel, I'm telling you, it was Thanksgiving morning around 11 a.m. I'm at my parents' house in Austin, and I'm sitting there just, we're in a chat, just trying to get this all figured out because this campaign is launching. My mom comes in and says, honey, we are sitting down to Thanksgiving lunch. Would you like to join us? And I looked at her and I said, I would love to join you. I'll be there in about 45 minutes. Bottom line is we got it out there. Campaign was a success. It worked out well, but the whole team just bought in, just rallied behind this cause of we have got this outstanding product. We know that it's going to do well by the client. Our knees kind of got chopped out from underneath us. So let's figure out the best way forward. And we just rallied together, got it done.
Well, it is a great example of a very good idea too, a very good concept that it can work on different levels, right? It wasn't only tied to one thing. There was overall value to the customer that was separated from a back end, and you change out the back end. So that was great. But it gets me thinking now that as you've moved on in your career, like what element of contingency planning do you do? Or is there just like, you can just never do it right and you have to have an agile team? Because when you talk about Murphy's Law, I don't know if everyone listening knows the term, but it means that which can go wrong will go wrong.
It absolutely will.
And anyone who's worked in marketing long enough, that's so true. It's even more when it's like, live things going on. So, now that you move up into kind of more C-level roles, more strategic roles, how do you balance? Is there specific like contingency planning you do for certain things? Yeah. So take us through that.
Always. Yeah. So always, whenever we're setting up a tactic that's going to deliver on a particular strategy, the strategy shouldn't necessarily carry a contingency plan because that's a high level agreed upon, need that you need to get to and address and how you're getting there. The tactics that drive up to it, you have to expect something to go wrong. Any smart marketing strategy will have multiple touch points and elements to it. Whether it's a creative that's just not responding, you need to have a contingency plan for it. Whether it's an event that's part of your marketing strategy and, God forbid, and this has happened to me in my past, a hurricane hits and now your event cannot happen because of that, you need to have a contingency plan behind it. In that case, we had an event taking place in Houston. Hurricane was going through Houston. We had a media plan supporting it. Well, now we had to pivot that media plan and move it out of market and into another market quickly because we didn't want people driving. We didn't want to drive people to an event that wasn't going to take place. So you just have to be prepared. So if something happens and you get that last minute call from your client saying, hey, this has happened, what are we going to do? You don't just kind of sit there with your mouth agape like, I don't know. You got to have an idea of, understand what the goal of the strategy was and how, and you should have a kind of backup plan of how you can still get there if this fails.
Yeah, you mentioned about that's especially true for live events. So many things can go wrong with live events. We've had the hurricane thing happen before. Here's another lesson you mentioned. When you can't send a sample, send the entire state. So how on earth did you do this?
Yeah, so I spent about a decade of my career working on Texas tourism. If you're not familiar with what that means, each state and most big cities have a tourism budget that they have out there to try and drive leisure and business tourism. Most cities rely very, very heavily on tourism income. States rely on it very heavily. A lot of the funds that come into state taxes come through tourism funds. So the example I give you, Texas operates on what's called a hotel occupancy tax. So when you come and stay in Texas, if you go look through your bill, you'll see a hotel occupancy tax. The state of Texas gets, I think it's 0.5% of that tax, and that funds their tourism budget. Upwards of, I think when I finally rolled off the account, it was about $40 million a year funding that tourism campaign. So I did that for about 10 years. And we were doing some strategic planning to try and figure out how we could really make a mark on people who had poor perceptions of Texas as a tourism destination. This was based on a research study that we had seen called the State Brand Index. So the State Brand Index essentially looked at states as the state's brand as a tourism destination. Texas ranked, I want to say 47th. So we were right near the bottom. I think New Jersey ranked last. It just befuddled me because I grew up in Texas. I've been all over this state. And so I'm going to brag about the state a little bit. Texas, I'm going to sell it to people who haven't been here yet. Texas has 7 different ecological regions. The only state that has more than that is California. Texas has everything from 8,000 foot mountain peaks to actual white sand beaches. I know I sound like I'm lying. I'm not lying. South Padre Island has white sand beaches. Texas has bogs that are similar to bogs and swamps that are similar to Louisiana. Rolling prairies. We get the Panhandle gets a ton of snow each year. Can't quite ski there, but they do get a ton of snow. But there's just Texas is such a beautiful state, and our brand was it's like a whole other country. Well, to anybody who's never been here, another bit of research we found is that once you visit Texas, and again, this was 15 years ago, but once you'd visit Texas, you were like 10 times more likely to recommend and to visit again. I want to say that it was like 75% of people who visited Texas said, yes, I'm coming back. Whereas those who hadn't visited Texas said they were only like 30% likely to visit. So there's just these massive gaps. And in marketing, once somebody consumes your product, if they have a favorable experience, what are they going to do? They're going to consume it again, or they're going to recommend it to their friends and family. Texas is not necessarily like Tide. You can't send a sample of Texas to somebody in the mail. If you did, I don't know what that would look like, but over time it might not smell real good. So the idea and the strategy here was, how can we bring Texas to people? So what we did is we developed out a strategy called an experiential marketing campaign. We earmarked a sizable amount of budget, rationalized it with the business case, got some partners on board to help fund it as well, some sponsors, and then started pushing forward. This experiential campaign had multiple components to it. So we worked with a company called Red Peg Marketing. It's based out of Alexandria. It's still great partners, and I speak to them every now and again, to create this large footprint that could stand on its own, but for the most part visited 15 different targeted state fairs a year. So it had multiple pieces to it. And if the audience wants to go, I think you can still just search up Texas on Tour, and you'll get a video that kind of shows you a highlight reel.
It reminded me of its own like traveling carnival or state fair. When you say state fair, that's what it looked like.
Very much a good comparison. So we had a 30-foot enclosable dome theater. We had really a first of its kind VR kayak experience. We had a green screen theater. We had a live music stage. And then we had like a lot of just kind of experiential stuff going on. SeaWorld is one of our sponsors, so they showed up on a couple of destinations and brought animals, porcupines and penguins and all kinds of stuff. Porcupines, by the way, are really soft when you pet them, which was kind of a surprise to me. So it was a 18-wheeler truck that, like a transformer, just folded out into these experiences. So as we got people, and then we had, and this kind of leads me to where I am today, but we had a really big branded merch campaign. So we gave away T-shirts, caps. Everybody loved these really cool branded bandanas that we had. And we played games on site, and people could engage with our brand ambassadors on site, educated all of these brand ambassadors so they became Texas enthusiasts and really knowledgeable about the state, even though they might live in Des Moines. They would travel with us from destination to destination. So we almost kind of had our little cult following of brand ambassadors that were employed by Red Peg.
It was the carnival.
So the camp, yeah. it was. And so we did this during my tenure. It lasted, I want to say 4 or 5 years until I left the agency. It continued on for another 6-7 years. So it made it a full decade. But we went from destination to destination, had live concerts. Some of them sponsored. A lot of times they were sponsored by the city of Austin, which is live music capital of the world. So they would bring their artists to play. We could then, if you signed up for our newsletter, we would send you downloadable MP3s of the artists who performed. All of that sponsored by Austin. But at the end of the day, what we also did from a partnership perspective is we partnered with Orbitz and hotels.com to then go back and track. So when we went to Los Angeles, when we went to Chicago, to Des Moines, to Kansas City, to New York City, to Boston, we went to all of these different cities. We targeted these cities because they had enough lift, direct flights back to Texas. And they already, on our website, we saw them as opportunity markets, and that we had a relatively high level of visitation. What we saw in each of those markets, leaning into hotels.com and Orbitz, is that all of those cities, after we visited, saw immediate lift. All of them saw more searches for Texas. We started getting increased bookings from each of those cities to Texas from those markets. So the impact of it was astronomical. And then we did surveys of some of the attendees as well. Asked them what their perceptions of Texas were before they got there, what they were after they went through the experience, and all of them would see a big flip. They all would, call it hot, dry, and dusty, and then they would walk out saying, "I really got to check it out. It seems like it's a whole lot more than that. Oh, it's like a whole other country." So, I mean, it worked really well. It was a great way to kind of flip the perspective of Texas on its head by allowing people to experience it in their own backyard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of experiential. I think sometimes we have shifted so far to digital marketing. Sometimes we think that's the only tactic. Getting people out there and actually trying it can be very powerful. One of the things you mentioned was the bands, live music. I know you mentioned you had like the old 97s write a specific song for this. I wonder, we talk now about influencer partnerships, creator partnerships, and all this. Is there anything you learned about that from partnering with the old 97s to write this song?
Oh, for sure. So we, the last year that I was on the campaign, 2010, I think, we actually did three standalone events. We did one at Navy Pier, we did one at, I can't remember the name of the pier in New York. We did one at Navy Pier in Chicago, and then another one at Pier 49, I think, something like that, in San Francisco. And each one of those, we had Old 97s do a live concert. And Rhett Miller and the gang at Old 97s were amazing to work with. You mentioned it a second ago. There's a song that they produced called Texas, which was written before they went on tour with us. So I'm going to go ahead and take credit for that and say that they wrote the song for our tour. I'm going to make another leap and just say that Rhett wrote it for me, but that's cool too. I'll make that assumption. But they were completely on board and working with us to the point to where we had kind of a traveling brand ambassador tour go through each of those cities with this big inflatable ad that they would tow throughout the city, and they handed out concert tickets. Well, the concert tickets were really just little promo pieces leading people back to the spot where Texas on Tour was located, with details about the concert and that sort of thing. And we would get, 1,000 people show up for these concerts. It was the best last day anybody could ever have on a job was my last day at TM in San Francisco, where I got to go hang out with Old 97s before the performance in their green room, then went up on stage and introduced them. And then literally after the show was over, I handed my laptop to my AE and I said, "Okay, I'm done." And then we went out and had a good time. But yeah, having them as influencers, I mean, immediately when you're handing out these tickets to a live free concert from Old 97s, I mean, it was just immediate borrowed equity. So yeah.
Oh yeah, and if anyone who knows that band, a rockabilly band, you just feel the Texas out of them. They had a song probably before you did this, West Texas Teardrops.
Oh, it's great.
Just made me want to go to West Texas. All right, so it's very interesting. You talk about, so our first example was you took like an in-person experiential type of process in that store that you talked about, and you brought it digitally. Your second example was actually trying to take a state tourism and make it experiential out to people. And I think this brings up what I was talking about at the top. A brand, there are so many different touch points that a brand can have online and offline. So you mentioned one thing you learned was formalize the brand and consistency will come. So with all these different touch points a brand can have, how did you formalize the brand?
So this was after I left the agency space. I went to a trade association called Meeting Professionals International. I was recruited over there. I was, ready to transition out of the agency world. Had some interest in getting into the tourism and hospitality space after my experience with Texas and a few hotel brands and a few other tourism brands. And so MPI, Meeting Professionals International, is the business side of the hospitality market. So really, their thing is working with event professionals. And so I wanted to learn that space of it because the business leisure side of it is a huge part of travel and tourism. So when I went there as their marketing lead, their senior director of marketing communications. And what I found is that they had a very strong brand. Their tagline is "When we meet, we change the world." So really, you feel some good energy behind that. There was no real formal positioning behind it. So they had a good tagline. They seemed to be able to talk internally about what the brand meant, but it hadn't been formalized, and that positioning was inconsistent at best. At the time, MPI had 17,000 members, 70 some odd chapters. One chapter to the next, the experience was completely different. From a brand standpoint, logos looked different. It was just fluid with inconsistency. So I ended up engaging with Belmont Icehouse, which was the agency that I had left to go to MPI, and brought them on board as our brand agency to really redo the brand positioning, and not even create a brand positioning for MPI. There's a lot of kind of pieces to that brand that had to get out there because, this particular trade association, and PPAI is the same, part of our value to our membership is in-person engagement through events. So even at our events at MPI, the MPI brand we didn't seem to own it very well. You would come to our event and it seemed like a great event, but MPI wasn't necessarily present there because we didn't have a brand activation at our own event. So what we started to do is really stitch together consistency with that positioning, selling it internally before we sold it externally. So getting the staff on board with, hey, this is what we mean when we say, when we meet, we change the world. These are the core values of MPI. These are the pillars of our strategy, our mission, our vision. This is what we are doing for our membership and our community. And then after we got that set inside, then we started going out to our 70 plus chapters, same kind of toolkit, and providing them with monthly creative toolkits so that they paired with what MPI was doing. So now you've got 70 chapters communicating the same as the global brand. In essence, and I've done some franchise work in my past, we were creating a franchise model. I worked on 7-Eleven back in the day briefly, and we created these massive kits for 7,000 convenience stores around the world. Well, this just translated over to that. So now we're creating these marketing toolkits for all these chapters, just really pushing forward that consistency. And what you started to see our members really, I used the word rally earlier about Sports Chalet. They started to rally behind "When we meet, we change the world." They started to rally behind the branding. And when I transitioned out of MPI, we started doing a lot of our own merch for the members. And I mean, they would go crazy over it. Just simple things like a Yeti cup with not the MPI logo on it, but the tagline on it. No logo on it at all, just the tagline. And people just loved it. It allowed that kind of consistency. A lot of really good associations almost develop a little bit of a cult-like feeling. PPAI certainly has that. MPI really, it had it when I came into it, and boy, that just blew up over time there because people really started getting behind what the brand meant internally and externally. And that consistency, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. That's what really kind of just started everything gelling.
Well, and part of that is their experience with the brand.
Correct.
At MPI, you rose to Chief Experience Officer. And I wonder, in rising that role, you're talking about getting to a lot of details here. When you started to rise up, at what level did you keep your kind of fingers in the pot and get very detail oriented? And what level did you stay strategic and execute through others? And I ask because when I interviewed Jim Kruger, the executive vice president and chief marketing officer of Informatica, one of his lessons he told me was the higher you get in the organization, the more details you need to know, which seems counterintuitive. For you, on the one hand, C-level, right? On the other hand, experience to me seems so detail-oriented, not to mention experience with people who are meeting professionals and this is their job. So what level, as you kind of, you told us where you came in, as you grew into that chief experience officer, what level did you stay in the details? At what level did you get more strategic and execute through others?
Yeah. So it's interesting. If as you're in the process of kind of rising through the ranks, I got some good advice back in the day to use an executive coach to help me learn and get past any barriers that I might not know are there. One of the great things that the executive coach told me, we went through an exercise of what are you really good at? What's gotten you here? And then, if there were 5 things that I'd said had got me there, she took 4 of those and said, you need to forget all of those. Those are things that are going to hold you back as you start to get to the next level. One of them was, I was always known, especially in my agency days, as go to Drew. If you needed something to get done, just go to Drew. He'll take care of it. As you start to rise through the ranks, you cannot do that anymore. You can't go to Daniel. Like you can't. There's too much that has to be done. A and B, you need to empower the people who work for you to get their jobs done to support the strategy that you are driving down. That said, I also am a big believer in leaders have to know how. So the example I'll give you, and you mentioned details. At the end of the day, if we have a workflow management platform, I need to know how to do that. You don't want me in there, but I need to be able to speak that language and understand those details. Getting, a little bit down more into the tactics of marketing plans. I always want to be present when the marketing plan is being finalized so that I can at least ensure that what is being output by the team is pairing with overall strategy. Those are the kind of details and the depth that I continue to be in as a chief experience officer, and I continue to be in as a CEO now. I will tell you that at the C level, if you find yourself getting too deep into the weeds, you might lose scope of what's happening up top, and you'll get bogged down into it. I think one of the greatest lessons that I have learned is that empowerment, because when you don't empower the people who need to be a level or 2 down to do their jobs, they feel like they can't do their jobs. Then they feel like it's always got to be go to Drew that gets it done for me. And I'm just never going to rise up the ranks here myself. So I get it. Like, I think we as C-level leaders, we all need to know those details. It's the way in which you dive into those details and engage with those who are leading them. I think that's the key difference.
Well, we talked about some of the things that Drew made in his career. That's a great thing we get to do is make things, but we get to make them with other people as well. So soon we'll talk about some of the people that empowered Drew in his career and that he learned from. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MechLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. You can get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry in our AI Guild, along with a community to collaborate with. Grab your free 3-month scholarship to the AI Guild at join.mechlabsai.com. That's join.mechlabsai.com. All right, Drew, let's talk about some of these people that empowered you, or at least that you learned from. You specifically mentioned Wade Alger. You said you learned from Wade. He told you, tell me what you know definitively, not what you think. So why did he tell you this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Wade is one of my favorite people that I've ever worked with. I really hope he doesn't listen to this because I don't want him to hear me saying all these kind things about him, but very brilliant, creative. He's worked at TM. I worked with him at TM. He's worked at Martin Agency. He's had a number of incredible campaigns that he's put together. I was fortunate enough to work with he and Tom Demetrio and Andy Mars, my kind of creative director team. I guess they needed 3 creative directors to tackle me at TM. All brilliant guys. So when I was at TM, I had gotten hired on as the account supervisor on the Texas tourism business. And, understandably, Texas, it's a government account. It's a show account for an agency. So when you get an account like that, it's not one that you expect to make money on, although we tried really hard to. It's not going to be profitable, but it's one that gains other business for you, because typically those type of accounts, you get some levity to do some really good work. And they gave us that. The Texas tourism client, wonderful, wonderful people. I never want that job to work within a government agency like that, because it seems fraught with a lot of issues. But we really got to do some cool stuff like Texas on Tour. So after I was hired at TM as account supervisor in the Austin office, we're cranking out a lot of ads, and I'd only been there for I call it 6 weeks, something like that. So there's an ad that comes through, and strategically the headline wasn't right for what it needed to communicate. So I, kind of put my thoughts on it, sent it back to the team, and I suggested a headline. Okay. And so then I get a message back from Wade saying, why did you change this? And I said, well, I'm not changing. I'm giving you a suggestion. He said, why are you giving me a suggestion? I said, well, I think, and I can't remember exactly what it said, but I said, I think based on the target audience, this probably isn't going to work. And he said very bluntly to me, I don't give an F what you think. I need to know what you know. I said, oh, okay. So a little me thought all of a sudden I get kind of red faced, and fortunately this is before Zoom and Teams, so he can't see that I'm sweating right now. I'm like, okay, give me more guidance here. And he said, look, you are the definitive expert on this client. We hired you to be the expert on this client. You need to know what the client knows. You need to strategically know why we are doing things. He said, I don't want to hear the words I think. I don't care what you think. I need to know what you know. And so I said, cool. Okay. So what I know is that the target audience is, vacationers in Oklahoma City, and we're trying to get them down for a winter vacation. I'm making up stuff here, but real simply, Wade replied back to me, cool, I'll put the team in action. And that was it. And Wade and I talk multiple times a year. We keep up quite a bit. I ran into one of his really good colleagues just a few months ago. We were talking smack about him, but he's heard me say this a few times, that there's bits of advice that I've gotten in my career, but I don't care what you think. I want to know what you know is such a good line. Tell always when you're giving direction, talk in strategy, talk definitively. Don't talk about opinion.
Yeah. Well, when I hear that line, the other thing I think of is that sometimes we're not the customer. And I wonder if you've done anything with a client where you're not the customer to figure out how to get in their mind. Because something I hear, definitely I've heard from art directors and others over the years, is like, I would never read that. I would never read that ad. It's so long. Right. I would never read it. And I would be like, who's going to read it? Like if your refrigerator broke that morning, then you're going to read it. Then you might want to read a page about a refrigerator and you might be interested, or a landing page or whatever it is. And I think sometimes in marketing and advertising, we look at it through our lens. What I would do, I would do this, I would do that. We're so different when we're actually on the customer journey and potentially buying. So I wonder, to kind of extend on that lesson from Wade, which I think is probably one thing he was saying in a sense, is what have you done to put yourself in the shoes of a customer when you were not that customer?
Oh, I got a really good one for that. So for those, this is a podcast, so you can't see what I'm wearing right now, but I went to the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm a huge UT grad. We're in the process of hopefully winning a national championship in softball. And one of my clients for 5 years, we were the agency of record for Texas A&M University, which if you follow, collegiate sports, that A&M hates Texas, and Texas, to be honest, we could kind of care less about A&M. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So I worked on Texas A&M as their lead strategist for 5 years. I did, with a great team, we did so many cool campaigns for them. We were responsible for, at the time, running a recruitment campaign that resulted in the largest freshman class in the history of the university. So we did a lot of really cool stuff. Again, like Texas Tourism, they allowed us to do some great creative, some great strategies. Wonderful people that worked there. I will tell you right now, that's a product I would not consume. I grew up in Austin. I grew up, I'm third generation University of Texas grad. I have multiple friends who called me a sellout for working on that client. And I said, you know what? They pay well and their checks cash. So I sleep well at night knowing that our agency is taken care of. But the reality is, look, that is a product that I personally would not consume, but I understand the target audience that would. A good example of that, my son has said he's interested in being an engineer. By all means, go to Texas A&M. I was an advertising grad. There's no reason for me I'm going to go to Texas over Texas A&M just for that regard. But their target audience is very specific at Texas A&M. They're an agricultural and engineering and manufacturing school. That's your target audience. That's not me. So learn, I'm learning about this industry now. I think what you find about really good marketers, I'm not necessarily saying I'm one, is that good marketers are quick learners. They can learn products really, really fast. So I had to learn about the Texas A&M culture. Again, not necessarily a culture that I would have wanted to be a part of, but I can totally understand the people that do. And I empathize with them, understand their wants and needs behind A&M as a university, as a fan base. And so worked with that knowledge to put my own perspective completely out of mine and look through the eyes of their consumer.
Yeah. And the step one is knowing that you're not always the customer. And I think, not to get too deep, that's something that this country struggles with right now. And so it's the marketers of the world that do really well at that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just one other quip on that. And I hope that I'm not the CEO that's like this or the boss that's like this, but it's very difficult. And I've been in that circle before in previous jobs where the CEO is saying, I just don't like that. And it's so hard to go to that CEO and say, I dig it. I know you don't like it. You're not the target audience. And that's a really hard conversation. And sometimes it does not go well. But if you're the marketer, you have got to have that conversation. You have to just say, I get that you don't like it. I kind of don't care that you don't, because you're not the target.
Yeah, a long time ago, we did this fun viral video. We were trying to do a thing we called it Fight the Squirrel. It's the CEO that loved squirrels and wanted all these squirrels on his landing page and all this. And so they were trying, and the idea is that the account executive and the marketing team were trying all these ideas to convince the CEO. And he's like, you're just squirrel haters. What's your problem? But at the end, they came with data. And that was the difference.
Yeah,
we're losing X amount of money every day. We have the squirrels on the home. Yeah. He's like, kill the squirrels. Who wants the squirrels? I don't want the squirrels.
Right. So then that goes back to my point. Tell them what you know definitively.
That's
Take
right.
emotion out of it. Take their emotion out of it.
An opinion.
Tell them what you know definitively.
That's right. Yep. All right. You said that Tim Hudson taught you that even bad brands can be good when they're consistent. So how'd you learn this from Tim?
Yeah, Tim, and I actually wouldn't mind if he hears this and hears me bragging about him. His ego and Wade's are very, very different. Tim is one of the best brand designers in terms of brand visualization that I've ever known. And so when I worked at Belmont Ice House for 7 years, I came on as their lead account guy and finished as their VP of account service. And Tim always had it kind of goes back to what we put into play at MPI, and that's consistency. I mean, how many horrible campaigns have you seen that you remember because they were brutally consistent? How many bad jingles have you heard in your life, but you remember them because they were brutally consistent? So sometimes, I'm not advocating for bad branding. I'm not advocating for bad strategy, but even bad strategy and bad creative output, if it's done consistently and it actually can make sense to the target in some way, shape, or form, that can be good strategy. So no agency strives for a bad brand, but every agency should strive for incredible consistency across the board. And so we used to talk about that all the time. That even bad branding can be good when it's consistent.
So where is that balance then when you keep a heritage and keep things going? versus when you know you need to pivot and change to something else. And I bring this up because I know PPAI, we talked about promotional products. Also, it's kind of becoming more known as branded merch. And I think that's probably a decision. And I don't want you to have to give anything away yet, but that probably some of the things that you have to think about right now. So how do you balance that consistency? If we all, agree with Santa Claus drinking a Coca-Cola 200 years ago, whatever, versus, markets move, things change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think it's the tenets of the brand that always need to be in place. So if it's bad branding, but it's working and it's consistent, then there's something that led there. There's those core pillars, and the core pillars to your brand should never change. I mean, with Nike, that it stands for victory. That's never going to change. I don't see them ever walking away from a just do it, but just do it aligns with victory. They put out some bad ads. They have. I mean, I'm a huge Nike aficionado, but they do some bad work at times. It's so damn consistent. It almost, I hate to say it, but it almost doesn't matter. They can just throw the swoosh on. Their entire ad could just be a swoosh for 30 seconds. It's still going to get its point across. That's not good branding, but that's consistency. So sometimes, there's certain factors that may come in, certain impacts that might hit your business that you need to pivot and address. But as long as you stay consistent with those core tenets of your brand, then you're going to be in good shape, because then if you need to pivot back, people are still going to get it.
So you talked about some great marketing lessons in general, but I always like to touch on the industry or the focus that the guest has. In your case, you are in nonprofits, an association as a nonprofit. You said one of the key lessons you learned was volunteers are your best resource, and you learned this from Paul Van Deventer. How did you learn this from Paul?
So when I got to MPI, I was coming directly from the agency space. I had nonprofits as clients. I'd worked with some trade associations as clients, but clearly I knew nothing about the association space as an employee. And I, again, was drinking from a fire hose to try and learn it. So at one point, Paul is the CEO at MPI, and I've been really fortunate to work with some wonderful people, and Paul is one of them, a great mentor. And he said, this is kind of the can-do Drew. He said, hey, you're saying yes to everything. I said, well, I think we can do all this stuff. He said, you can't. And I said, well, I think we can. He said, well, here's how you can. He said, volunteers. And I said, I don't know what that means. And he said, each of these good trade associations have a great volunteer network. And the reason they have a great volunteer network is that trade associations are heavily focused on ensuring that the mission of the organization is pushed forward. In MPI's case, the mission was all about event professionals, professional development, and advancing the events industry. In PPAI's case, it's around promotional products, right? So within these associations, the members all want to be involved in that mission. They want to have a hand in it. And the way to do that is through volunteerism. Most trade associations will have, a professional development committee, and a DEIB committee, and an international committee, and a strategic foresight committee, a volunteers and governance committee. So any slew of committees that you can get involved in. And these are all great opportunities to lead, and to really, in some instance, give back to the community and the industry that you love. So in having this conversation with Paul, he said, you can get some of these done. You need to use your volunteers. I said, okay, I don't think I quite understand that. He said, look, you've got a media volunteer, or a media committee. You've got a marketing committee. You don't have a big enough staff to get some of this done. So start to work with those committees to try and get some of the work done. Also, you can work with these committees to validate what you're doing. One of the good examples I'll give you. So at MPI, right after I had moved into the chief brand officer role, I took on the chapters team. And we were going through a pretty significant overhaul of the chapter structure. So again, MPI had about 70 chapters. Of the 15,000 members, I mean, 13,000 of them are organized into these local chapters. There's a DFW chapter, there's a Texas Hill Country chapter, there's a Chicago area chapter. So there's a Netherlands chapter, just all over the place. So as we're looking at this chapter restructuring, frankly, it had gone through the board once under a different leader and failed. The board said, no, this is a no-go. This isn't a good structure. This isn't planned out well enough. And so I then took it on and I said, okay, how can I get this done right? And I started thinking about what Paul had told me years back. I said, you know what? I'm going to create a network of validators, and I'm going to start with the community. Was it the community committee? The CMAC, Chapter Member Advisory Council. Started with them, brought in our DEI committee, and then brought in 3 or 4 different board members as another subcommittee. Started to put the structure together, then started validating it with each of them. Started to get feedback from them. Okay, went back, retooled it a little bit, and kept going through that process and refining it, and then actually used some of those board members to be presenters. So when it was taken to the board to represent, I presented some of it, but now some of their colleague board members were presenting it as well. So it was a matter of using the volunteers to not only refine this process, to inform this process, but also to advocate for it. So at the end of the day, when it was finally pitched out to our membership, hey, we are changing your entire chapter structure. And bear in mind, the MPI membership, you'll hear Texans say this a lot. I'm a Texan first and an American second. I don't say that, but some Texans do. A lot of the MPI members would say, I'm a member of the DFW chapter. Oh, and I'm a member of MPI as well. So now I've got all of these chapter leaders and these community leaders who are pitching it back to membership. And I'm just kind of standing back and watching. So now it's their product. It's not mine. And it got passed by the board easily, implemented, had a great community leader within the staff at MPI. And it's, I think it's in its 3rd year now and just absolutely soaring. So that's your volunteers become that source of information, that source of validity, that source of credibility. And if you've got, all associations typically have that, but on the corporate side as well, boy, just get those key stakeholders involved. Those can be your volunteers.
So what you're talking about is an organizational structure, but is that what it also takes to get marketing campaigns and messages approved? Because earlier when you were talking about, earlier you're talking about Texas, and you're like, hey, this is a dream campaign for an agency to have. And on the one side, I can see there's the upside, there's the brand, there's the network. Oh my gosh, of every, I'm sure, tourist company in Texas. But when you're talking about a CVB, when you're talking about a nonprofit, when you're talking about an association, they don't have the streamlined structure that a private business can do. I mean, and even private businesses, I was interviewing I think yesterday we published a podcast with a key marketing leader at McKinsey who was talking about stakeholders in software companies she worked at, in McKinsey, where there's partners. Every organization has stakeholders, but my gosh, do nonprofits and associations and CVBs have a lot of stakeholders, and marketing is the thing everyone thinks they know because it's that outbound message. So, I mean, is that the same approach that you take when it comes to selling a marketing campaign?
Totally right. Totally right. I mean, lean into the stakeholders. When you, it's a little bit of that I was a psychology major for a year. So manipulating minds is something that marketing does. Hey, make people think that this is partially their idea. Once you get your stakeholders with some ownership that, oh, well, what if you did this? Oh, yeah, we could do that. Well, now this just became part of their idea. So now they're not only going to be on board for it, they're going to advocate and push. I always say that when you're pitching it, whether it's a campaign, a strategy, et cetera, you got to put that bulletproof shield in front of you. So you are prepared for every single answer. Part of that bulletproof shield is those stakeholders helping you defend. Because when you have somebody that's not you, that's one of them, defending your effort and rationalizing it for them because they are them, that's instant credibility. It's the third party validation. At home, I can tell my wife that we need to go do something. She'll say no, but then her friend comes in and says the same thing, and she'll say, "Oh yeah, sure." It's the same concept. It's my wife is a stakeholder. This person is a stakeholder. There you go. That's it. It's getting the stakeholders on board.
Bring them along on the journey too. It sounds like.
That's right. That's right.
All right, let's get to a final personal lesson. This is very personal, cuts very deep, so deep you wouldn't even name these people in this. This is a totally anonymous. If you want, we can kind of cloak your voice and cloak your face, all that stuff.
I could do some cloaking myself. No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you should always have a chip to help push you forward. So how did you learn to have that lesson?
Yeah. So, I mean, if any of your listeners are in the agency biz, you've always got that director who seems to be out there trying to really help you, and then boy, you kind of feel that knife just start to kind of you feel it kind of tickle your back a little bit. This was the precursor to that because this knife got shoved in me pretty hard later. So I had a director back in the day who it was review time, and review went around, and I got copied into a draft that I wasn't supposed to see. And within that, the director said, great employee, gets things done. Probably best to keep his niche on non-complex, simple clients. Don't really see him as much of a strategic thinker. Just don't think that this is, we need to keep him on simple stuff. I read that, and I mean, it was, I don't know what's beyond a slap to the face, but we'll call it a punch in the nether region. And I was pissed. I mean, I was pissed. So I went to the CEO of the agency at the time, another great mentor, and I stormed in, and he said, "What's up?" And I said, "You saw this?" And he said, "Yeah, you were copied on it. You were not supposed to be." And I said, "It's bullshit." He said, "Yeah, it's bullshit." I said, "I don't know what to do with this." He said, "Look, man, I disagree with this. I don't think he's in a very good place right now. I think that was written in a bad headspace. It's not the case. You are a strategic thinker. I've seen it. I've worked with you on smart strategies. Just take this and own it, and don't worry about it." And I said, "Okay." And it pissed me off. And I mean, this is 15 plus years ago, and I carry that chip. So I think what it's done over time is it's allowed me to almost think anybody is looking at me through that lens. Is this guy really a strategic thinker? Or is he just, flying by the hip? So that goes back to being definitive, talking about what I know definitively, not what I think. Doing the research, doing the background, drinking from the fire hose, informing myself as best as I can, because that's how you build smart strategies. You look at all the angles. We are doing a lot of advocacy at PPAI right now around tariffs, because tariffs are really disturbing the promotional merch community. There's a lot of these small businesses that put a ton of investment in markets outside of the United States to bring products in. So when we talk about smart strategies and smart thinking, we talk about how the tariff strategy is one that is not strategic. It is one that is very just kind of throwing something out there to see how it lands. So I carry that chip with me, and I reinforce it with teammates, and ask the questions before we act tactically. What's the end goal? What's the objective? What's this going to accomplish? What's it mean for our target audience? Tell me what you know. Don't tell me what you think. So it kind of, that chip is, I mean, it's kind of driven me to where I am today. And it really drives a lot of my focus and how I think.
So I could, after that, ask you about how you became a long-term strategic thinker, but I don't want to ask you about that because I know we can train and figure that out. I want to ask you really the harder question. In that role, how did you go about becoming a long-term strategic thinker and having a chip, but preserving that relationship on some level? And let me tell you what I mean real quick. This always stuck with me. I interviewed John Reed, who is the CMO of AI Identified. And one of his key lessons was be easy to root for. And he told this great story. They were filming a campaign for Adidas. They're filming these different up and coming celebrities. One was this rapper who was like really full of himself, thought it was a big favor for him to be there, had this, big crew coming with him and all this stuff. Never amounted to anything. Someone else very early in his career was Michael B. Jordan, who came in, was the nicest guy, very humble, very helpful, no crew, and he became a big star. And that was a great example of he was easy to root for. So going back to your story, you talk about a chip. I can imagine walking out of a CEO's office, it's going to be like I'll show him, but he was still your supervisor. And part of it is not just, like you said, you actually having the strategic chops. It's the perception. It's having him on your side and rooting for you. So walking out of that CEO's office, take us like, what did you do next to not just become strategic, but also to be easy to root for?
Yeah. So one of the things I took from the CEO was bad headspace. So when that review was written, that individual wasn't in a good place. So I took that into consideration. I mean, I was pissed, and our CEO really, he calmed me down. I mean, this was your lay on the couch and let me talk to you for a second kind of moment. I was a psychology major for a year. He was turning that right back around on. So I cooled down and understood and empathized with where that director was. He knew that I was copied into it. I calmly went in and said, "Hey, I saw this." And he said, "Yeah, you weren't supposed to." And I said, "Well, I did. I don't agree with it." And he said, he kind of copped it. And he said, "Okay, I get it. And it's something maybe we can work on." And I frankly wanted to turn around and say, "I don't think I need to work on it with you." But I said, "Yeah, I think it's something we can work on. I think we can continue to work on our relationship too." We did. And our relationship was fine until he firmly planted that knife in my back about 5 years later. But it dials into empathy. So just understand, sometimes people react and have they're in certain places, and you need to. This is a term that's overused, but it's still a good one. You got to meet people where they're at sometimes. I had a conversation with a member just the other day who sent a very vicious email to me about something that clearly they didn't have a good understanding around. So I had a good conversation with them, understood their perspective, empathized with them, and gave them some realities around what their perceptions were. Walked away from it as a good conversation that could have been inflammatory, but ended up being good. So I think you ask, how do you get people to root for you? Understand them, empathize with them, listen to them, in this, especially in the sales and marketing industry. And I am definitely guilty of this. Boy, we like to talk sometimes. The best thing we can do is listen.
Well, that's a great kind of endpoint to this. And it's been a pleasure listening to you talk. And you've talked about so many different things, these stories from your career. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've said it pretty often here. First is never, always seek out validation. Don't just act on an impulse. Find data to support a strategy, and then build a plan and tactics around it. Get people to buy into it. Don't make decisions. And this is I like to say this as a leader as well. Unilateral decision making will get you into a lot of trouble. And that goes in line with that stakeholder development and making sure that people are bought into concepts and strategies and organizational plans. And again, I am guilty of not doing a good job of communicating at times too. So be a very good communicator. Don't assume that everybody can hear what's inside your head. When you are pulling together organizational strategies and structures, and I've learned this the hard way here, to be very transparent and vulnerable. Don't assume that your staff know what the strategies are just because you're presenting them in board meetings and on main stages. Start internally first. Get your team behind you, then move externally. Those are the ways just to be a good leader. But yeah, being a good marketer, look at all the angles. Look at all the angles and get your stakeholders in mind.
Well, thanks for sharing all these stories and lessons from your career, Drew. I learned a lot.
You bet. Thanks, Daniel. It's an honor to be on part of this, man.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.